So, horror by nature relies on fear, and this is an aspect that stretches into pretty much every subcategory of the genre, including religion and its presence within it. From The Exorcist to The Witch, the genre has been forcing audiences to confront the power of faith, the weight of sin, and the terror of doubt for decades. But in 2024, Heretic took those ideas and moved in a different direction. Instead of external demons, it focuses on something even more unsettling, that battle between conviction and uncertainty, between devotion and the crushing possibility that everything you believe in could be a lie. Through a tense narrative with claustrophobic storytelling, spearheaded by a trio of fantastic performances in Chloe East, Sophie Thatcher and Hugh Grant, the film strips the concept of faith down to its rawest form, asking whether belief can thrive when it's truly tested. It's a narrative about power, the power of religion, the power of skepticism, and the even greater power that is questioning both. Now, last week I looked at Azrael, which was a film that looked to weaponize silence, but this week we're going to be doing something that is pretty much the opposite and analysing how Heretic fuels its war with words. As a result, deriving fear in an entirely different way altogether. Heretic is a direct interrogation of faith, in the broader context of belief itself, not necessarily restricted to just a religious sense. The film explores the result of tested convictions, subjective truth, and when doubt becomes a force equally as powerful as devotion. By dissecting the ideas of heresy, faith, rebellion, and even truth, it presents this struggle in which belief is both a weapon and a hindrance. The central conflict revolves around Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, played by Thatcher and East, two young Mormon missionaries whose faith is not just a personal belief system, but an all-encompassing worldview. Their mission, built on the certainty of the idea that their version of truth is absolute, is challenged when they step into the home of the enigmatic Mr. Reed. Hugh Grant's Mr. Reed is the film's ideological antagonist, embodying the role of the titular heretic, someone seeking to dismantle the faith in others rather than simply rejecting it and being at peace with that. His path stems from a desire to discover the one true religion, something he claims to have actually done. His initial approach isn't actually aggressive, luring the sisters into a conversation that challenges their beliefs in a way that is both intellectually engaging and also subtly menacing. There's enough of a balanced blend between charm and menace here that allows for that mask slip to be less unexpected. Over time, his methods shift from persuasion into coercion as he exerts both physical and psychological control over the missionaries, forcing them into a confrontation with their own doubts. What I find particularly unsettling about Heretic is the way that it frames faith as both an uncanny strength and an immense vulnerability. The film doesn't just depict faith as something that can be lost, it shows how belief can be manipulated and weaponized when pushed to an extreme, both by those who enforce it and those who seek to tear it all down. This makes for such a compelling extension of those themes that Heretic explores. Mr. Reed may be the antagonist, but that doesn't mean there isn't a case to suggest that he's not entirely wrong in his critiques of organised religion. The missionaries, while sincere, represent a systematic belief that relies on structure and submission. And yet despite that, the film never actually attempts to condone faith, as that isn't its purpose. It condemns the forces on both sides that demand total, unbridled submission. In doing this, Heretic asks a question much more terrifying than the concept of belief being either true or false. It asks what happens when the very act of questioning is what spurs the danger. Religious horror has always explored those profound fears that are associated with faith, doubt, and the unknown. Regarded classics like The Exorcist, The Witch, and The Seventh Seal have all explored these themes uniquely, using supernatural elements to probe the human psyche. Heretic differs from those examples, choosing to ground its horror in the philosophical and the psychological, deliberately avoiding overt supernaturalism to focus on the terror of ideological confrontation. In The Exorcist, the horror emerges from an external demonic force, with faith serving as a weapon against evil. Heretic conversely internalizes that horror, presenting Mr. Reed as a charming antagonist who embodies the concept of atheistic nihilism. His interactions with Paxton and Barnes challenge beliefs deeply held by the girls, turning their faith into an unlikely source of vulnerability rather than the strength they hoped it would be. This inversion compels the audience to confront the idea that the erosion of belief can be just as terrifying as any external evil that we may face. Similarly, while The Witch portrays the methodical disintegration of a Puritan family under the weight of religious paranoia and supernatural forces, Heretic strips away the supernatural element to expose the raw terror of faith under siege. The film is confined to the claustrophobic setting of Mr. Reed's home, intensifying that sense of entrapment and helplessness as the girls grapple with existential dread. The Seventh Seal offers more of a philosophical meditation on faith and morality, with the protagonist seeking answers during a time of plague. Heretic mirrors that existential aspect, but narrows the focus to a personal, more intimate scale. The horror stems from intense, well-written dialogue and torment-filled psychological manipulation, forcing Paxton, Barnes, and us, the audience, to question the foundation of our beliefs. Heretic sets itself apart from other films in the religious side of horror with a minimalist approach. The film relies on the intensity of interaction and the tension generated from philosophical debates, and that's where a large amount of praise has to be given to its cast. The three truly do a phenomenal job at delivering the weight of these roles. Chloe East and Sophie Thatcher bring this believable sense of tragedy and vulnerability to the characters of Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes respectively. Their counter is Hugh Grant, bringing a performance that's blanketed by a sweet, charming nature at first, becoming more foreboding as things develop. His performance is dripping with a sense of malice that never really seems to fade, and I think that's a testament to the power of the writing department here, because it gives the acting a platform to stand on, elevating itself above what it could have ended up being. The focus that the film shows in that battle of ideologies, faith versus skepticism, creates a unique perspective that is both intellectual and deeply unsettling at the same time. The horror arises not from external threats, but the internal collapse of what we deem to be certainty, leaving everyone to ponder the terrifying possibility that our deeply held beliefs may be nothing more than a comforting illusion. Heretic is a tightly contained psychological thriller where the implications stretch far beyond the walls of Mr. Reed's home. Beneath that deconstruction of faith and doubt, the film is tapping into broader anxieties about control, ideological extremism, and the fear of those who think differently from us. In doing that, it becomes this reflection of the ways that society polices thought, punishes dissent, and enforces ideological purity, whether in religious, political, or cultural spheres. One of the many unsettling elements of the film is the way that Mr. Reed is able to mirror the very forces he seeks to dismantle. His aggressive skepticism isn't presented as open-minded inquiry, but as its own chaotic form of rigid dogma. Just as religious institutions often demand this unwavering faith from its followers, Reed demands a total rejection of it, leaving no room for nuance in any shape or form. This creates an uncanny parallel to the real-world ideological extremism, where those on opposite sides of a belief system can end up mirroring each other in their intolerance for one another. Heretic suggests that the danger isn't necessarily belief or disbelief itself, but that inability to allow space for doubt, discussion, and personal agency. The fear of a so-called otherness in the film is another deep-lying undercurrent. The sisters enter Reed's home as outsiders, representative of a worldview that he despises, but as the story unfolds, that line between victim and oppressor begins to blur. The film asks us whether or not we are capable of questioning who's really in control and whether anyone in this story is even free to begin with. This echoes a larger anxiety in the fear of encountering beliefs that may challenge our own, and the lengths that people will go to in order to either convert or eradicate opposing ideologies. Whether through religious evangelism or atheism, Heretic shows a world in which these conflicts become battles for dominance rather than the conversations in the face of a prolonged search for the truth. Perhaps the thing most relevant to modern societal fears is that present critique of authoritarianism. Not purely in the literal sense of political regimes, but in the way that the systems of power enforce absolute loyalty. Whether through religious institutions, governments, or even social movements, the demand for unwavering belief can come across as oppressive. Heretic captures that effect by showing us how the missionaries and Mr. Reed exist within rigid frameworks that leave little room for any form of personal autonomy. The horror stems from the existential crisis of realizing that the structures meant to provide us with meaning and security can just as easily become prisons. Heretic is not just a story about faith. To imply that would be an incredibly shallow interpretation of the story. It's about humanity and our need for certainty, and the dangers of what can happen if that need turns to an uncompromising demand for ideological purity. It's unsettling in the way that it forces us to confront difficult questions. It's a film about the power struggles that emerge when any form of belief is challenged. By stripping religious horror down to its rawest form, it exposes the fragility of certainty and the fear that comes when questioning everything you've ever known. Through an exploitative examination of heresy, ideology, and control, the film transcends psychological horror, offering a bleak reflection of the broader societal tensions that shape the way in which we think, act, and believe. Whether it's religious institutions demanding unwavering faith, skeptics insisting on absolute rejection, or political and cultural movements enforcing this purity, Heretic does its best to show the dangers of rigid conviction in any form. But perhaps what makes Heretic truly haunting is the distinct refusal to pick a side. It never once tells us which belief system is right, only that when certainty becomes a weapon, the consequences can be just as terrifying as any supernatural horror. And in a modern current climate that thrives on division, that might just be the most unsettling message of any film in 2024.